So anyway, welcome to everyone here. Really glad to be hosting the space with you all. As some of you know, Casimir, Pablo, Greg, a part of the neighborhoods team and have been putting in a lot of work into these salons as spaces to receive feedback from the community, but also share progress, also disseminate a little bit from our research and dev process so that we're not building things in a little cave without feedback loops. So yeah, we'd love to keep this as interactive and conversational as possible. We've got a few presentations that we can share with you, that we will share with you. Initially, it's a little intro to neighborhoods. My guess is most people here are familiar with Holochain. I think that's a fair assumption I can make. And my guess is also people here have been following neighborhoods' work. And so we'll keep it super brief and more just an update on what's been up and what's coming over the next month or so. I think at a very high level, personally, I've been very excited about the last few months and exceedingly excited about what's about to come over the horizon in the next 30 to 40 days. Um, it's going to be a first tangible, engageable, playable, hopefully people will play with it and even break it like version of neighborhoods that we'll put out there, because we see the importance of people being able to get into it as opposed to maybe just playing with just parts of it like in maybe 6 months ago or 9 months ago. So yeah, so at some point in early to mid Jan, you'll see this version of neighborhoods. It's pretty minimalistic, but will give you a sense of like what a neighborhood would look like and what that experience for a community activator or a member of a neighborhood would be like. And yeah, I guess through this process, through today's salon, you'll get a sense of how we've tried to break down that process of sense making. First up, you'll notice we've not been using the word reputation as much, and that's while reputation was fantastic in a lot of, I would say, academic conversations at the beginning of this project, we soon realized like framing it more as sense making was a much more broader way of or way of involving a much broader segment, a broader section of people, and also brought it into much more tangible reality because reputation could often spin off into conversations that weren't entirely related to what we were doing at at neighborhoods. Cass, I think there's a couple people in the waiting room. If you could, I'm getting notifications and I can't seem to let them in. So we'd really recommend checking out this paper that's been published a couple months ago. Pablo and a few others from Neighborhoods team tried to, I would say, take a crack at um, deconstructing what social sense making looks like in networks, in communities, in virtual environments, or even offline communities. Um, Articulate some of what could be primitive sense making data and try and construct some kind of process that communities use towards sense making. And so yeah, I'd recommend checking out this PDF. My guess is some of you might have done that or at least checked out some of the snippets from it already. Or if you've been part of any of the conversations on social media, you would have seen this. But effectively, yeah, can you shift to the next slide? Like this, the social sense making paper talks about resources, agents, and something called methods. And resources we've typically come to know as material objects, particularly those familiar with projects like Hollow REA or any kind of decentralized or distributed accounting system. But we've tried to broaden that to a much larger definition to interactions we might have in virtual spaces. So for example, a blog or an Instagram post would be considered a resource in neighborhoods land. And that's because these are very tangible objects, even though they're virtual, we consider them objects that can signal what different agents in the system might have produced, what are capable of producing, and might also be indicators for future behavior. So resources could really be pretty broad, everything ranging from blog posts to songs to transactions to timestamp data. Whatever that community decides is a resource and is valuable for them. Agents are people who perform various actions. So they might be generating these resources. They might be articulating the culture or governance of that group. They might also be adding assessments to resources. So an agent might also clap on a blog post to signal to others in the group that it is valuable and that they should also read it. Um, and then the last piece, the third piece of this puzzle is something called methods, which is effectively a mathematical formula that communities use to crunch down all of these social primitives into something extremely tangible, a reduction of sorts for that community. So you might have thousands of blogs generated by a community, let's say a research community, but that community may use a method to say, this is how we choose which blogs get seen the most, or this is how we assign value to specific agents in a community because they produce the most relevant and best blogs. So a method is a computation of sorts, a mathematical computation, or you could also say it's a cultural lens that's used by that community to signal something to everyone in the members. Now, this process of assigning the method is defined by the governance of that community, and we think people will come to neighborhoods because of these methods, because the cognitive load of trying to make sense of everything that happens in the world, just the sheer like load of it can be pretty overwhelming. And so I might not want to evaluate each movie by myself. I might want to go to a community that I relate to tell me which movies are the best that I should be looking out for. And of course, this is a big leap away from some of the very static monolithic communities today, on I would say non-communities like IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes, because those are quite universal, whereas these would be like very contextually created. So, uh, I'm guessing movies that movie communities that Pablo would be part of would not be the same ones that I would be part of. That's because Pablo is just cooler than I am. And so that's the general use of a method, or why we think people will come to neighborhoods, not capital N, just like individual communities or neighborhoods. And so, do you want to keep moving, Cass? Um, Over the course of these 6 months, we've been in this process where we've been mapping these primitives for groupware into holochain architecture. And so what you're likely to see, what I referenced earlier, this first holochain version of neighborhoods, first engageable version, is that mapping of this paper into holochain architecture. And so this has been done through, or is being done, or still the process is still on, through pretty iterative conversations and salons such as these. Next slide. Can I? Yeah. Um, which includes salons with community activators such as yourself, early applet developers, as well as other community members who've been constantly feedbacking to us. Um, Early applet development, I'm not sure we'll speak about that too much yet, but our hope is in the next month, or probably in early to mid-Jan, we would be publishing a certain set of standards through which external applet developers could create applets for neighborhoods. We're using the word applet because it signifies a little generic tool or widget that can be plugged into a neighborhood, as opposed to large monolithic apps that often enforce or override communities or culture. Like applets plug into a community's membrane, into a community's governance, or into a community's locally articulated culture. And that's the key difference, which is why we think the word applet is kind of cute and fits the scope of work here. So at this point, where we've been working with applet developers that have been pretty internal. In the next month, it's like one membrane out, like people like Srini and a few others are plugging in, who are, probably at the, you know, uh, like one step removed from core. And that'll be our first experiment working with slightly external applet developers. And hopefully January onwards, that membrane will expand outwards and anyone would be able to read a bunch of specifications and develop applets. And through this process, this is kind of exciting. We think pretty much any holochain app can plug into neighborhoods, or pretty much any holochain app can be scraped by the SenseMaker for this process of conversations or interactions within neighborhoods, which is exciting, which means we're not looking at too much complexity when it comes to applet developers. Like they don't have to create necessarily a separate neighborhoods applet. It could just be any holochain applet. And that I think broadens, or at least I think makes our paths to hitting the road much or gaining traction much easier. Yeah, and so as part of like this manifestation holochain architecture, what you'll see in January is a HAP or a DNA called the SenseMaker Lite. The SenseMaker Lite is effectively a cultural computer in which communities can say these are the things we consider resources, these are the things we consider methods, and agents can generate all of these all these resources, and they get chomped or computed down using a method into some simple cognizable output. And so every little applet in that neighborhood will be able to plug into the SenseMaker Lite and receive sense made output from it. So effectively, you could have a neighborhood with a blogging app. You could have a neighborhood with a meme sharing app. You could have a neighborhood with peer-to-peer lending. All of these within the same neighborhood. But interestingly, people who contribute the most to blogging might receive the best lines of credit, or might be discovered more when it comes to room sharing or resource sharing. And so those kinds of possibilities are open up because you've got one SenseMaker like DNA coordinating within that social context. And so you'll actually see this, the first neighborhood with multiple DNAs and the ability to plug pretty much any DNA or any applet into it in that first version. And along with the SenseMaker Lite, this I'll be quick here, is something called the minimum viable wizard, which is a dashboard for community activators or the progenitors or the first initiators of a community to be able to say these are what we consider resources within the community. These are what we consider methods within this community, and our intention is for this. We're using the word wizard because we want to signal this would be accessible for anyone without developer or coding skills. So literally as easy as operating an Excel spreadsheet, or for those who were live in the 90s, Microsoft Access is, I think, always a good comparable in my in my mind. Yeah, next slide. Yes. I don't know if you need to get into it, but this is from at a very high level what the SenseMaker DNA looks like. You've got provider DNAs that come from applets, and so your little blogging applets or chess playing applets or Space Invader applets or meme sharing applets are provider DNAs. The community layers metadata onto them, defines what the formula is for figuring out the best resources or best agents. Um, at a little abstracted level is an interpreter that runs cultural computations on the fly, because you want to let communities articulate this and re-articulate it every hour, every day, without having to reload or re-roll out a holochain DNA. And what the output is put through what's known as context. So every little applet can access this information that's generated by the SenseMaker DNA. And while in January we'll only be looking at one neighborhood, this lays the foundations for multi-neighborhood interactions as well, because other DNAs could also start plugging into this SenseMaker. So the SenseMaker doesn't differentiate as much between DNAs or applets within its own neighborhood or from outside neighborhoods. So I think a simple way to describe this setup is, I think, the structure of an atom, where you have a little nucleus and the SenseMaker is that nucleus, and you've got little applets as electrons in orbit around the SenseMaker. And that's, I think, a high school physics level way of describing it, if I've got my nomenclature right. But yeah, that's some of what you'll see coming over the horizon. Do we want to, Greg, do you think we should stop for questions, or do you think we should keep rolling? What do you think?
If anybody has any quick, timely, short questions, they could that are directly related to what Sid was talking about, we could throw them in here. You could also hold them for later if you want. So use your own discernment.
Sure. It feels like Philip has his hand up already. Go for it, Philip.
Thanks. Just have one quick clarification, which I think is best served if we do it right now, which is you refer to contexts. Sid, could you explain whether you just use context in the everyday sense, or whether it has a specific meaning in this schema?
Yeah, it has a specific meaning, and feedback like this is actually useful, because we will be very open to new naming for the stuff. But I'd love Pablo to jump in, because I can see how excited he is.
I am super excited. This was such a good presentation, Sid. Thank you for that. Context in this context has a specific meaning. We're gonna be going into it in the upcoming presentation for the primitives. But just as a preview, it's a space where resources are shared, right? Something like a feed is a context. This is also shifting now with the development. There's a concept of cultural contexts, which are something like a feed that already has a specific scoring method attached to it. So it has a specific way of organizing resources. So that's where we're referring to as contexts, but we'll go deeper into it just in a moment. Should we start with primitives presentation?
Yeah,
I think we should, right?
Let's go into it. If anyone did have more questions about my presentation, just drop them in the chat and I'll keep responding there.
Yeah, but let's do it. So we're gonna be going through the elements, some of the elements of the primitives that we've developed. As you can see, we're in a moment of intense movement inside neighborhoods. Things are evolving literally as we speak, which is really exciting, but which also means that some of these names will probably shift a bit, which is a positive thing. We're grounding all of this in technical knowledge with the engineers. So that's exciting. But these primitives still stick to the original definition in the paper. Just for sake of continuity and simplicity. And once things have more cemented from our side, we'll share an updated view on this. Also, some of the primitives that are shown here will not be present in the upcoming Sensemaker light release, but most of them will actually be. So this is, I guess, a bit looking into the future as what's coming up next and what ideally we would like from neighborhoods. So just to keep that in mind. And we're gonna be using an example throughout the explanation. So this is we're gonna be building a speculative short story neighborhood community, right? Where people share short stories. So yeah, I think we can go into it. Casimir, if you can show me the first. We should, I think we start with the membrane, right? Membership. Yeah, perfect. So I've seen some comments in the chat about membranes being a useful term. We're borrowing that from the holochain lingo. We love the concept of membranes. In this specific context, membership, what we're referring to as membership, is the outer membrane of a community. So who can join a neighborhood? Is it public? Is it private? Is it by invitation? We're hoping that that is something that can be determined by each community, how that membrane is crossed. And it's basically, yeah, how agents enter a group, right? That's it. In the case of the neighborhood we are creating now, the short story neighborhood, let's say it's by invitation. You need to be invited by other member. Then the next concept we're going to be talking about is roles. Roles define different types of members. So it specifically defines their access to contexts. We'll be talking about contexts in a moment, and the right within those contexts. So it is a much more nuanced view on what agents can do within a neighborhood. How can they react to resources? What context they are allowed in? Those kinds of things. In our speculative neighborhood, we have two different roles, one of the writer and one of the reader. So all members who have a writer role, they can post in any context, right? While readers can only read those posts, but cannot post them. So this is to give a sense of the possibilities of this hats protocol that was shared. I was just looking at it a couple of days ago. It's really interesting. It's an interesting implementation of it. And I've seen many of these primitives have started to be flying around, like in the Web3 space, different implementations of it. But I see a lot of like things are gravitating towards specific terms, and I'm really enjoying that the conversation is going that way. So yeah, just to comment on what's being shared. So those are the two roles that we're going with. Yeah, convergence of terms. There's definitely that happening. Then a central concept within neighborhoods that Sid was already talking about is the idea of resources. Resources are the entries that we make sense upon. It is what the neighborhood is about, right? The movies inside a movie neighborhood, the recipes inside a cooking neighborhood, those kinds of like really central elements inside a community, the information that we share. You've encountered resources in social media as it stands today. So for example, tweets in Twitter are an example of a resource. Products in Amazon, songs in SoundCloud, articles in a blog, but also things like proposals in a poll, right? If you start to see proposals in a poll as a resource, you can imagine how the neighborhoods framework also enables forms of governance, where proposals that are sensed made upon float to the top in terms of visibility and starts to become a way of making decisions together as well, right? Resource can be composed of literally anything, text, images, videos, streams, audio, even other software, even embedded software from other places. So you can make up a resource out of everything. And a resource can also be composed of multiple things, right? Which I think is really, really important. So for example, an Instagram post is composed of multiple images. you refer to it, or we refer to it as a resource in its capacity to be reacted to. So you can, when you react to an Instagram post, you react to the whole thing. Even if it has multiple images, you like all of them at the same time. If you could react to each individual image on itself, then we would call that individual image a resource. So that's the idea of resources. In the example of our short story community, the resource would be the short stories, composed of maybe, I don't know, arbitrary limit of 480 characters. We can continue now. Reactions. Yeah, reactions are also a crucial part of our ontology. They are the gestures we use to convey our impression of resources. So basically how members engage with resources shared by others. We've divided reactions as sort of like this fast way of liking something or clapping to something, sort of like a very immediate way of engaging with a resource. So things like likes, claps, emoji reactions, you've encountered those in social media apps, but also things like flags, right? When you are flagging a specific resource because it has mature content or because it's sensitive for some reason, that is also a form of reaction, right? And we want those kinds of abilities to be contained within the reactions framework. Also things like bookmarking. When you save a resource for your own internal context of bookmarks, that could also be enabled through a reaction system. And then we're also referring specifically to assessments, which are a particular way of reacting to something that instead of being fast and immediate is a more thoughtful action, right? So things like rating something. When you're in a ride sharing app and you have to rate your driver, that requires a bit more thoughtfulness. Or if you are rating a product, maybe that's even accompanied by a written review of sorts. So it's a particular form of reaction that is more thoughtful, and it also has the capacity to be reacted to. So you can react to other people's assessments. Maybe not always, maybe not in all neighborhoods, but we do think it might prove useful that assessments become a sort of reaction resource, so you can react to it. This is an example I've used often. If you have a ride sharing app and someone gives a terrible rating to a driver and it's accompanied by a racist review, it would be really helpful that other members of the community can react to that review so that the value of that negative assessment is reduced through the engagement of other members of a community. So those are assessments. In our example neighborhood, the reactions would be simply a like. So you can like a short story or you can not like it, basically. And there's also a user-defined reaction in the form of tags, so that members of the neighborhood can be like, okay, this is a horror short story, or this is a sci-fi short story. In that way, we have two types of reactions, one of them defined at a neighborhoods level, and one of them defined at an agent level, which is the tags. Yeah, we can continue. Badges. Badges are a way of formalizing certain credentials of members of a neighborhood. They are a way to have distinctions added to those members that modify the value of their reactions. It is a way of qualifying certain assessments. It is a way of formalizing the expertise of certain members of the community. So in our example, we're using the badge expert, which is a badge that it identifies those who are knowledgeable of a certain genre of short stories. so that their reactions are worth more. Basically, we want to signal that we trust certain members. Maybe there's a famed sci-fi short story writer and we really value their specific opinion. Why not create a badge that really enables the opinion of this person to be regarded highly inside a community, right? So that's the idea of badges. And then we're missing, yeah, scoring. Scoring, as Sid was referring to, is a method that allows us to determine the order in which resources are shown within a context. It is what is referred to as the algorithm, right? And this is like a crucial part of neighborhoods. We want to open this black box of the algorithm. We want to make it community defined. We want to make it accessible to people. We want to make it composable and modular so that different types of algorithms and scorings can enable us different forms of sense making. How do we organize the resources that we share? What information should be prioritized? What it's ultimately defines what kind of sense making we want to do, right? These are very simple examples of some scoring. You have like, if every like is valued at 1, then you would have like this linear scoring mechanism. But you could have a different one. You could have one where maybe likes take a while to push a resource up in visibility. Maybe you have the inverted case where a few likes really push something up in visibility and then it slows down, right? And then you need even more likes to push it up. You could even have multiple reactions and different scoring for each reaction. So if you have an angry and a happy reaction emoji, maybe you want the things that make you happy to be pushed further up in the visibility, and those that make you angry to have less of an impact on the visibility of a resource. Maybe this could be inverted, right? And we want to see the things that make us angry at the top. This is the power of scoring, community-enabled scoring. We want this to be in the hands of the people who use them, so that people can find whatever is useful for them, right? We can continue. I think we're missing,
just
context.
real quick on
Yeah,
scoring. I thought it'd be interesting to mention, like with some of the other sections that Pablo went through, we imagine scoring to also be modular, and which means communities don't actually have to come up with scoring. Like many communities may not be interested in this kind of mathematical work. So they would just plug in these scoring modules like off the shelf or in the marketplace. So it's kind of like auto tune for your community. And so you might have some little modules that are more inclusive, more exclusive, like you'd have little sliders which allow you to play with, and literally modulate the culture of the group in a very playful, simplistic way. So yeah, I know some of this might seem like highly mathematical work, but we fully expect people to abstract that into little simple, easy to work with modules. That's it. Pablo, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out. Also because it's go ahead.
Pablo, sorry to interject you. I had a point. I thought I'll better bring it up. So one thing that as I was listening to you, I was following this literature also. That struck me is the recency matters quite a lot. It might be the recency of the post or the recency of the like or comment, etc. Right? And sometimes you may have to kind of compute the like versus how recent it is, right? When you are ordering things in the context of the feed. So I believe that also has been factored in.
That is absolutely correct. And that actually brings me to something that I skipped and I shouldn't have skipped, which is the example of how the scoring would work in this speculative short story community, which is a simple scoring that takes into account likes and time. So it shows something that has been liked, the things that are liked the most, but then that like decreases in value over time. right? As time passes, it becomes less relevant and allows new stories to float to the top. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And there, if you check out the sense-making paper, we're talking about things like subjective measurements, subjective elements like the reactions, but also objective ones like timestamps. In this case, a combination of both is probably the best way to create the scoring, right? Where you take into account time and likes, assessments, whatnot. Regarding, like, I have been having trouble following the chat, but I saw Paul commented on like, maybe people can fixate over their scoring, and I totally agree. In this case, scoring is of resources, not of people, and maybe the naming could change, right? Like, I could totally agree that maybe scoring is a bit antagonistic in its terminology, so we could totally think of a word that conveys better the nature of ordering resources. I guess that's what we're talking about here. But finally, as a final component of these primitives, we're yeah, relevance is a good one for sure. Let's talk about that conversation. We're like right now having those conversations about the specific names we want to use for this, and like just like pinning down the terms. So yeah, this is super helpful. So finally, contexts. Contexts are the spaces, the surfaces, the dimensional spaces where resources are shared. It's an inner membrane within a neighborhood as well. So in the sense of we envision each context to have its own rules of who can enter and what they can do inside of a specific context. And basically, when designing a neighborhood, context define, or you have to ask the question, what is the best way to present a specific resource in a visual space? Some examples of contexts in a very short list would be something like a feed. It's a one-dimensional context. Things are organized from top to bottom normally. But then you also have a grid, right? Which is a two-dimensional context with every element being having the same size, like in an Instagram profile, for example. But then you also have more complex contexts, like a publication blog, where you have maybe, imagine a newspaper front page. You have the headline article being bigger. Then you have maybe 2 or 3 mid-sized articles, and then you might have 8 different smaller articles. So even though it is the same context, within this context, maybe the most important resource has more visibility inside of a design. And then you have examples like a timeline, which is not only spatial, but also time-based. So something like Instagram stories is an example of this. You have resources take the whole screen, but they are organized through time. That is how the scoring affects what is shown first, what is shown after. And then, of course, you could have context within contexts. We see this happening all the time within interfaces. Subcontexts, you could have an Instagram post that has a subcontext for comments. And inside that subcontext, the resource comment has its own scoring mechanism, right? So you can see how this can fractally scale up, scale down, and really start to map out some more complex interfaces. As a last exercise for this, Casimir did mapping of the Twitter interface to our ontology, just as a way of relating more broadly and describing, describing an app. I don't know if Casimir, you want to go over this mapping yourself?
Yeah, sure. You can interject if there's anything I miss. But yeah, so now it should be a little bit clear the different elements of the sense making process. So here we can see in Twitter.
Real quick, should we do questions first?
That's a good idea.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do some questions.
It feels like we've had questions in the chat, which has been quite active, but in case something's coming to mind, does someone just unmute and go for it? or raise your hand.
So I believe
Yeah,
this
sure.
might covered by Pablo. Basically, there might be certain kind of communities where the user would want to see their friends posts first or something. So I believe when it comes to resources, the relationship between the poster versus the viewer kind of thing may have to be factored in. Just a thought, like I was just remembering that in a Facebook I would see my friends post first, and then I would see others, right? Pablo, you want to?
Absolutely. Yeah, the social graph of the person should in many cases be like an influence of the visibility of resources. Like in Instagram with the comments, you see the comments of your friends first, the likes of your friends first. So that's a good example. And what's interesting about those types of scorings is that even though the scoring within a community might be shared, so for example, you will see the likes of your friends first. That is distributed along the community, but it will be different for each agent because each agent has different friends. So it's an interesting take on the scoring. Paul has the hand up. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, so in relation to like reactions, which were all like ways that you can react to people's posts, like their different resources, have you also thought about, is it possible for people to react to other agents, as in like other people, members of the community?
That's a good question. It depends whether a community has a context where members are up in as resources, right? Maybe if you want to do like, let's vote on a representative of this home gardening community because we want to send someone to a congress, for example, right? And maybe there you could do a poll where agents are up in a context and you can react to them. But generally speaking, I don't think we have the intention of by default having people vote on people's in a community, but I see cases where that might be useful for specific situations. But yeah, for sure, it should be possible to do. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, home chef communities, Airbnb clones, etc. Yeah, go ahead, Guillaume.
Sorry. I had another question, and I can't see if there was anyone with their hand up. So please, let me know. So if I understood correctly, each context is related to a scoring mechanism or scoring method. Is that the case?
Yep. I mean, yes.
Cool. Is there some way of having feedback on that scoring mechanism itself?
That's great question. Yeah, and this is going into the topic of how to do governance of a neighborhood, right? Like how to decentralize the community activator role in a sense that the community itself creates the mechanisms that govern that community. So for the first implementations, we're thinking of the community activator role as more one person, but we totally have in mind ways of that being slowly decentralized and like become part of the community itself. And having feedback on those scorings within each context is precisely a way to do it.
And again, I imagine that would also be modular, so you would have templates for governance that you could just pick from, so it's not as tedious a process for every community.
Right. Yeah. Even templates with parameters, right? So I want the I don't know, the Reddit algorithm, but with this parameter of time matters this much or whatever. Like I totally see it. I was just asking because like I don't know, in my head, it is tricky to find a good scoring mechanism for a particular context, or don't you see it that way? Like that's maybe a question. Do you think for a particular context, like how difficult is it to actually find a good scoring mechanism? I don't know.
Depends. Yeah, I mean, totally. But it depends, I think, on the complexity of the research and the community and the importance of that research, right? Like maybe a meme sharing feed with just likes, but that's good enough. Most like memes in the last week go to the top. I think that could be good enough. But if we're talking about a form of governance enabled through reactions, then the nuance is important. Time becomes crucial. So I think it depends on each specific definition, but it is definitely a difficult thing to do. And right now, like just to give an example, what if then each context has a subcontext with possible scorings that people can react to? And then the scoring that is at the top of that context is applied to the context itself. So you could have a way of reacting to scorings as a way of defining a score within a context. This is like just to talk about the fractality of how this system allows for these things to happen, right? But yeah.
Yep. Sorry for going down a bit into a rabbit hole, but thanks.
No, that's great.
So much sense.
I mean, to me, these kinds of questions really show that this is like landing with people and that it's sort of making sense. So that to me is great to hear. If there's no more questions, we can go on with Twitter mapping.
Let's roll with Cass's section and questions after that as well.
Sounds good. So this should be pretty quick and hopefully make things even more understandable. So yeah, as I was saying, in Twitter, if we're all familiar with Twitter, I'm guessing so, there's actually a way to change your scoring on your feed. So at the very top, you can choose to see things chronologically, latest tweets, or to see it based on preferences, content preferences. So this is something that like we're already experience a little bit of, but clearly not as much as in Neighbourhoods. But that's kind of the scoring. And then here we have different resources. So a tweet would be a resource. And then we have reactions. So likes or hearts in Twitter would be a reaction. We can see contexts such as our feed of tweets, but also we might see a context like our own profile with our own list of tweets. We could also see like trending hashtags as a context, or people that you might like as a context. Then we have roles. So it's not very prevalent in Twitter, but I guess like your profile and like information about you can somewhat define your role. And one piece that Twitter is having trouble with now is obviously the badges. So the blue check mark used to be kind of the way to know that somebody is who they are, especially people in positions of like fame or noteworthiness or so you can see how when like the way that badges are issued can make a big difference on the usefulness that they provide to the sense making. So as soon as Twitter started selling badges, suddenly you couldn't really know who was the real person because anybody could buy a badge. That's basically it. It was just this kind of also lists. Yeah, that list could be a context. So you can make your own contexts that you populate with your own resources that you want to keep track of. That is all. We have prepared another part of the presentation or of the board, which we don't want to go into because it's something that we're not sure how much time it would take and how clear it is, but it's an invitation for anybody who would like to. I'll drop the link to this board in the chat. And this is kind of a little play space where you can start to compose and play with how would you organize your own neighborhood if you had some community in mind. so there's a canvas in the middle. On the left side, you can define the name and the purpose. And on the right side, you have some descriptions of the different like ontological pieces. And you have your kind of elements that you can compose with. So that's a little something for everyone who's curious to play with.
Yeah, and our intention with this is that if some of you have communities you are already part of, or communities that you have in mind that you think could be implemented inside neighborhoods, if you can use this tool and you can map your community to it, then we're doing a good job. But if not, if you're like, hey, I'm totally missing this thing, or like, how would you implement this other thing? That would be for us great feedback into knowing some holes in our ontology, right? This is also an invitation for you to write to us and be like, I used the tool, I tried this out, it went this way, or I'm missing this other thing. And we can even prepare a session where we go individually with some of you, if you would like, mapping your ideas to this ontology. As I say, things are shifting right now, so it might be a bit either too late or too early to use specifically this ontology. So maybe once things cement by the end of the year with the release, that would be a great moment to do it. But just keep it in mind that we're open to those kinds of interactions and for you to start playing with this tool.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I would say down the road, definitely next year, these would evolve into cultural hackathons as people learn how to play with their own neighborhoods and start running their own neighborhoods. I can see Guillaume thinks that's hilarious, but yeah, cultural hackathon might be the word for it.
One thing I've missed, sorry, just one last thing that I've missed saying from where like you were interjecting at many moments to say like, yes, and this could be modular and you can plug it in this other way. I think what this modularity is pointing towards is the marketplace as a place where developers can also submit these different modules, right? And I think that's fundamental, and I would like to bring it up because I know there's a few developers in the room. So we envision that the marketplace would have different spaces of different modules that could be shared. So there could be a marketplace section for contexts, and people could be more in the front end world, designing different contexts that have different characteristics, ways of organizing resources. Some are time-based, some are only spatial, but then there's a whole category of scoring, and people who are more data scientists could be creating these modular scorings. Then you could have people creating resources and people creating specific reactions and ways of reacting to things. And then you can just interplay between all of them, right? So this is also pointing towards that ecosystem of developers and like how there's place for different types of developers in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add with the marketplace, obviously there would be a model where developers or creators of these modules would earn a livelihood based on the usage of these modules, but you'd also have models where communities can kickstart these modules. Like enough communities want a specific kind of applet or a specific kind of cultural module or governance template, like that can start, like that kind of aggregation can happen. You can have grant-based models which create open source modules and are free and available for everyone to use. Like those have become, default open source modules that are also available in the market. So it's more like, I would say the marketplace is more a space for communities and its members to meet people who develop these modules for them, and figure out how they want to engage commercially or non-commercially with each other. Philip?
Sid, that was the perfect segue to my question, actually, because the question popped into my mind when you were showing the Miro template where we could play around and see if we could design our intentional or currently actual community in this schema. And it prompted the question as Ted Rao says, in terms of sociocracy, who decides who decides? So one thing that I wonder if it might be underemphasized in this presentation rather than underemphasized in general is the governance aspects of this. If I'm designing a community with others, how do we decide? But based on all living processes, it's never static. How do we decide together that we want to change the way in which the community is configured? Is that meta to this presentation yeah.
Pablo, you want to take that? Cass?
Yeah, I can comment, and if you can also interject. Yeah, that is absolutely crucial. I think right now, because of the complexities of having multiple agents have a say in how a neighborhood is configured, it's coming up sort of like in the midterm future, not immediately, but it is crucially part of how we're thinking of designing neighborhoods. Governance will be part of the modularity of the system. We're also wanting to, of course, you can vote for things and things can be decided that way, but we want to understand governance as simply another form of sense making, where maybe in many cases it sort of dissolves into the background of the regular interaction with the system. And of course, there's moments where it's useful that it becomes much more explicit and forefront. But I also see that many of the decisions could take place organically through well designed scorings, contexts, and resources. So that is my take on it. But if you want to add to it, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can add. I can add real quick, and Greg, maybe you can go. I guess fundamentally, what gives me comfort with some of the the concerns you raised, Philip, is operating in an agent-centric environment like Holochain opens up new dynamics just do not exist in regular technology. For example, forking or cloning of communities will be extremely easy and possible in these environments. And so the ability to walk away but still retain your data and your social fabric and your information is massive, in my opinion, in these environments. So it just doesn't seem to have the same zero-sum dynamics that you see in that we've been limited to in the past, like where the person who planted the flag first in the ground wins and they get to define what the governance of that that land is. And it feels like that dynamic got replicated in Web 2.0, where because your data is locked in these silos, the person who planted their flag first could define what the governance of that community is. And so it's impossible to walk away because your data is locked in there. But I think with agent-centric environments, that dynamic completely shifts. So a community, 99% of that community could decide they don't like the leaders of this community and fork and bridge into a new community. And I think that is an interesting dynamic. It gives me a lot of comfort in knowing that, governance will have an interesting. I think it's going to start on a new ground, in the sense like it's not the same locked in way that we have with all the dynamics that we're used to currently. But I can keep going on that, but I think forking is a dynamic worth keeping in mind.
So rather than the extreme that's called rage quitting, which just makes me laugh every time I hear it. Yeah. It's more just the law of 2 feet, right? If you decide that this isn't for you, just
but law of 2 feet. Fork. But remember, this is Yeah, but remember, this is a non-zero sum economy, and so you literally take your social fabric with you. So it's not like you're forked out into a reality where all your stuff is still locked. It's like if you decide to leave Twitter, your tweets don't come with you. But in agent-centric environments, it's on your conductor. Like you actually fork the new community and bridge. You can literally build off what you've already been creating or working on. So you will have access to that content, to that reputation data, to that sense making data that you've had previously, which is a key difference. So it's not rage quitting as much as it's yeah, I don't know how to put it, like um excluding the problem, I guess. Like maybe that's the way to frame it. Like you would actually
It's
spin a
like
new, yeah, clone a
moving
new,
houses.
yeah,
You're just, yeah,
could
moving
be,
with all
yeah.
your stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, all your
I'm like
friends.
wary of using old economy language because like you can't clone a house, right? Like the physical
True,
infrastructure of a house. Like that's what's different here.
true.
Um, and so you could choose to like literally carry your reputation data with you, and therefore you're not out in the lurch. So anyway, there's an interesting article, I think published by Holochain. I'll try and find it and put it in the chat, which addresses this dynamic, like the option to walk away, which I think addresses this concern. Greg, do you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing up forking in agent-centric environments. I think that becomes a new and very important aspect of the potential for sense making and for just kind of informal organic coordination and governance of resources. I do want to note, I think that formal official governance is very important whenever it happens, for good or bad. And I'm one of those people who has paid lots of attention to conflicts and tensions and struggles and interpretations and misinterpretations of policies in different communities over time. And so I think it's really important for governance to play a very intentional and very conscious role when it happens, because there is often a tyranny of structurelessness, which tyranny of structurelessness is the title of probably at least a tie for the #1 read that I would recommend, an essay by an American feminist, Joe Freeman, in 1972, it might have been 71, the original publication. So I think we can develop neighborhoods which avoid this tyranny of structurelessness by being very intentional about defining when we need to, the constitutional agreement or the general policy or the code of conduct within some neighborhood that has maybe some standards for inclusive community and defines its mission and the purpose of the people coming together there. And I think that will develop ways for people to create policies, but of course that ties into voting methods. And as mentioned in the chat, there's many different ways that we could develop voting methods, which could be plug and play or defined uniquely by a specific community once we have the tools in place to do that in a low code way.
Victor, I saw you had your hand up. Was there something you wanted to add to that? Or if you are busy at the moment and can't talk, you can write it in the chat.
Yeah, I was going somewhere else. Maybe more technical questions. Maybe that later.
Okay, I had a quick follow-up on the comment about governance, and for my side, coming from actually architecture design, participatory design is a big part of public spaces and the built environment, because you can't just fork the built environment, like Sid was saying. And I think there's something here in distributed spaces where when you can fork and walk away, you start realizing that your community will fracture really quickly if you don't make a great space for everyone. And we don't want like monolithic one neighborhood for everyone, but we also don't want like neighborhoods never to be able to grow and thrive. So I think the conversation of governance also fits into a conversation around like co-creation. It's not just about governing and making like formal decisions. It's about playing and experimenting together, and kind of how we do in social settings, negotiating on a constant basis. How do we interact? What are our norms of interaction? And I think if the tech can enable that, it can scale the positive parts of our like really our social intelligence as a species.
Yeah, real quick to riff off that. Philip, I do imagine a lot of these groups will start off pretty organically. And so you'll see that culture getting developed with like the kinds of games that they will play with each other. By games, I just mean like social interactions will be fairly low risk and organic initially. So maybe just sharing content with each other, like testing the waters with each other. And honestly, I think that's a way better approach towards eventually like formalizing into governance. It's not going to be this, we are a group of 50,000 and this is how we vote like on day one. I think it'll probably be, dozens and then hundreds of people who just flock together. And so the way we're designing is to allow that organic formalization to occur. Not so much like here's voting modules on day one. That's just what my gut says. Dave, you have a question?
Maybe a question, a little bit of an observation, something that came to me that feels like it applies here. Earlier when Guillaume brought up like there's like scoring of the scoring mechanism sort of, and a dynamic came up to me of regarding sense making, like external sense making, awareness of the environment, and then internal sense making of the group itself. And it feels like when Philip brought up about governance, and Sid is just now mentioning the organic evolution of governments, maybe that's what that like internal sense making of the group is. It kind of feels like to me. So I just wanted to share that. I see some cool. All right, so thanks. Just that's it for me then.
Thanks, Dave. Very good to see you. Paul?
Yeah, just another comment that kind of fits into that when you're talking about like, say, governance is something that could start to grow organically as communities start to use like a neighborhood system and start with low risk activities, things like sharing content. That all sounds pretty good, but it depends what the point of the whole community is that's using like a neighborhood in the first place, doesn't it? Like that would fit for something like meme sharing or sharing short stories, providing feedback, that kind of thing. But if it's a community that really is trying to organize and carry out activities together to achieve a goal collectively, then that's the kind of thing where you kind of need some kind of governance from the start, because it's like, well, who decides who does what, who decides who can be a member and who can't be a member, what happens if somebody is being a bad actor, or if some people believe somebody is being a bad actor, and that has consequences. It's not just like they're sharing rubbish memes, but they're actually working in a way it goes against the goals of the group, which are explicitly stated. They could be an adversary from a rival business. They could be, an undercover cop in a group of environmental activists. And, so just to say that in not all cases can we wait for governance to kind of arise organically out of the activities. Sometimes the activities require some kind of governance or some kind of way to organize in a more structured way, and involving trust as well from the beginning. Otherwise, they can't do what they're meant to do.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely agree. I think you will have cases at both ends of the spectrum. And for some of the cases that you're talking about, while, obviously because the method will be articulated in holochain ledgers. There is a certain amount of immutability and non-tamperability for the scores and the methods used and the governance used. But we're also, I think future releases will involve things like a neighborhoods lobby, where before you join neighborhoods, you have a very clear, statement of what this got, sort of like a Discord lobby today, where you see what the community values. So typically anyone entering a community, the kinds that you've described would have it, clearly displayed. And so they know exactly what they're signing into. And again, I think you will have templates for the stuff, so people would just be able to slot that in instead of having to, articulate it all by themselves. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Any
We're
other,
just under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We've just hit the 10-minute mark.
Yeah, we could close though. Any closing thoughts or questions, or yeah, if anyone's curious about what they'd like to engage with or something more they'd like to see from us, please go ahead and share.
I just have a quick question. Basically, like what I'm working with Guillaume with is like the first thing is an event thing, and who's attending the event would be a resource that's interesting for whether or not I want to come to an event, stuff like that. So my question is basically more technical of like, so how would we use neighborhoods, and how would neighborhoods know, or how would you specify that attendees to an event is a resource?
It might be fun. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. It might be fun to actually map this out in a Miro board, later through the week. Like we could actually take this use case that you're describing and we map it out. But effectively, we're talking about an applet where the app entry types are events. And so those events are resources, and I'm guessing agents would also be resources. Some of the agent stuff is a bit limited because of deep key not being fully stable yet, but I mean, it's definitely worth a conversation. And honestly, like if you're thinking about building out this event app, we would love to explore how it could be a app, like an applet for neighborhoods. So if you think, yeah, like if you'd like to build more in alignment with neighborhoods, you can definitely chat.
Yeah, that's definitely an applet that would be very useful. Just having events as resources, attendees can vote on ideal times that work for them, and then you have like an event that rises to the top, something like a holochain doodle kind of situation. Maybe generates a calendar invite already once the threshold is crossed. Like you can totally map this to the ontology we have right now.
I have a concluding comment, Sid, if I may, or not necessarily concluding one, but one pointing to some future work. Just comparing and contrasting this gathering, actually this rather male-dominated gathering, but this gathering here with what we've just talked about. And so we've just spent over an hour together in each other's company exploring some deep and meaningful things. At no point did we vote on anything. At no point did we try to quantify the sentiment in the room. And yet the schemas that we're looking at were very much about quantities. The word scoring is used. It's either that or it's that. So I guess for me, that's necessary, but perhaps insufficient in the long run. That's not a criticism. To do something necessary and sufficient in 2022, you'd be a wizard. But this is progress, is moving in the right direction. But what also has to join into this work in order for it to be both necessary and sufficient? And I think it must be marrying the quantitative with the qualitative, the opportunity to structure meaningful conversation, which some people call dialogue, in order to distinguish it from everyday chit chat. And so how can we enable people to explore hard choices that aren't easily quantified in a more conversational manner, that the conclusions for which then might go to thumbs up, thumbs down, but there's that process that we've all enjoyed here together today. How's that assisted in neighbourhoods? I guess that's something that's really driving my work at the moment, really kind of pressing my buttons. There's a lovely paper by Pangaro, can't remember who was his co-author was, come to me in a minute, on cybernetics 2015. The name of the paper will come to me in a minute, but one of the wonderful conclusions about that is there's this step that if you're trying to design a social technical system, then you are clearly in the realm of cybernetics. And as the cyberneticists themselves discovered more than half a century ago, if you're into cybernetics, you're also into second order cybernetics, putting yourself into the picture as an observer, learning from the second order feedback loops. And then if you're into second order cybernetics, then you are necessarily into conversation. And so just to contemplate design is to contemplate conversation. And it's beautifully argued in the paper. So there's this, and I don't know if any of us can point to a Web 2 or a Web 3 experience where you think, oh my God, I've just explored a fabulous, I feel so deeply about the conversation I've just been participated in, because it's all about, dopamine and retweets. And so how we move away from attention sucking to attention directed on meaningful issues through conversation is, I think, integral to binding community. And if we could do that asynchronously rather than requiring sort of jump into a Zoom synchronously, then that's going to be an amazing experience, and that would bring me back again and again and again. And hopefully others, once they get over doom scrolling.
Thank you. Thanks, Phillips. I think that is a really good note to close on, and just for us to mull over. And I think I'll just close by saying, like, you could say cultural sovereignty is what neighborhoods focuses on. And sometimes cultural sovereignty is the ability for a group to say, we don't want any rules or scores. We just want informal, organic conversations among ourselves, which is impossible to find in today's technological landscape, right? Like, you can't, as a group, show up on Facebook and not have something imposed on you. So even the right or the freedom to not articulate things is something hopefully neighborhoods would enable. And yeah, I think a lot to mull over what you said there. And yeah, I think on that note, we are on time, unless someone has some very quick closing comments. Pablo, Cass, anything? Yeah, why don't you go?
I wanted to a little bit respond to what you were mentioning, Philip, because it really resonated. And I noticed throughout the conversation, people have been doing this. So this is a bit of a soft reaction, like there's no quantification or scoring, but there's some kind of signaling happening. And I think one of the pieces that we come back to with the reactions being emoji based is that it's not about the quantification. It's not like always so important that there's a number behind it, but more about, like, if you talk to a void, you get no response. And so it's about creating that response and that signaling that we always look for in any social gathering, in any social interaction. We have to have the ability to listen, and someone else that we speak to has to have the ability to respond in any way, whether it's sign language or verbal or body language. And I think there's always going to be some lower latency or lower bandwidth in any digital context, because we don't have the same depth of the analog world is kind of where we evolved as a species. But if we can bring kind of the best of that world over.
Yeah. Thanks, Cass. Pablo, Cass, any closing remarks, like something you'd like people to plug into or follow?
I first of all, I just want to thank everyone for being here. This has been a really nice conversation. These closing thoughts have been really, really good. Like, I absolutely appreciate your presence here. And just reiterate our availability and openness for people to ping us in the Discord and have like continuous conversations, to be attentive of the upcoming releases, because yeah, very exciting stuff is coming. And we want to be engaged with our community and for everyone to be part of what actually is being developed. Like, that's the purpose of these salons. So yeah, just reiterate that openness.
Yeah, thanks. And so, yeah, if people like Victor have ideas for apps or applets that they like to develop, please reach out to us. This is a good time. Like I said, we're going to publish standards for some of these applets late next month or January, as we publish that first Neighbourhoods version, which is just over the horizon. Yeah, and if there's any communities that or use cases that you're thinking of, this is also a good time. We've dropped some links in the chat to the Miro board. Feel free to jump in and tag us and build out or map out some of these use cases that we discussed.
Yeah, I also just dropped the link for the Discord in case anybody isn't already there. We'd love to have you join.
Yeah, Discord is a great place to get in touch. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
End the conversation. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care, guys. Have a
Bye.
great day.
Bye, everyone. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah.
See you later,
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.